Baby locked and loaded worked last week because Kim Jong-un has decided not to launch any missiles toward Guam.
It is a win, very important. It was brinksmanship, it was a stare down, and North Korea, Kim Jong-un, blinked at President Trump.
The KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans.
He's condemned this in the very strongest terms humanly possible. But unfortunately, the mainstream media, the liberal left, they don't want to give him the credit which he deserves.
Today, Alabama voters will decide which Republican will run for Attorney General Jeff Sessions' vacant Senate seat.
Luther Strange getting the president's endorsement.
And we have the same goals, to make America great again, to implement his agenda. That's what the people of my state want.
Take a look at this. These nuns just can't kick their habit of rollerblading. They're known as the Holy Rollers.
Most often you get a shocked look. Hello. A lot of selfies. A lot of people want pictures.
New York City, that's our top story, and the face-off between the President of the United States and Kim Jong-un. It looks like somebody blinked because a Fox News alert. North Korea has announced, after meeting with his top military geniuses, Kim Jong-un has realized that if he started shooting at us, we would level that country.
That is so classic North Korea. You escalate, you escalate, you escalate, and then once they're finally threatened and realize, okay, if we actually do something, which they're never going to actually do, we're going to have to pull that back. I think China was a big part in this. I think they were behind the scenes, probably having some real conversations. But either way, to your point, Steve, tough rhetoric at this very point seems to be working. We don't know where it's going to go.
Steve, I like your word geniuses. You're right. They're not idiots because they understand if you actually do fire something, whether it's Secretary Mattis or President Trump, words have mattered with this administration. Right. There is a credible threat of military force. So as you referenced, he met with his generals at the command post, and the command post said, how about we live another day?
Indeed. Meanwhile, down at our command post in our nation's capital is Laura. She is, of course, the editor-in-chief of LifeSet and a Fox News contributor. And Laura Ingraham, it looks as if Kim Jong-un maybe got freaked out by what President Trump said last week.
Well, I look back and read the comments that were made about President Trump's comments about the situation. And it's instructive to do that because he was roundly ridiculed on all the usual shows and all the usual news sources. And it turns out that it looks like they were doing some back-channel communication with China. China publicly didn't look like it was doing much except saying everything needs to calm down. But President Trump, it looks like he handled the situation as it needed to be handled. And there's multi-channel diplomacy always going on behind the scenes. Everybody who has followed these comings and goings with North Korea for years knows that. And what usually happens is North Korea is trying to wring out some type of concession, whether it's supposedly food and medical supplies or other types of money or trade or something. They'll launch these tests of missiles, then they'll threaten, and then they think they'll get what they want. In this case, it didn't look like they got what they wanted. They actually are dealing with a president who sees this as a credible threat and understands that, unfortunately, there is an option that we might have to at some point take, which would be a horrible one. It's not a great option, but it's one we have to recognize. And that hasn't been verbalized before, neither by President Clinton, and remember the champagne glasses clinking with Madeleine Albright over there, or even President Bush. This was much different, and it took a lot of people back when you heard those words, you know, fire and fury from President Trump. But maybe in dealing with this kind of leader in North Korea, that's what you needed.
Yeah, seems like so far it's been handled the right way, but not everyone is saying that, Laura, about the president's response to what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the riots on Saturday. He came out, of course, after it happened, but didn't call out the hate group specifically by name. He did that yesterday. Why do you think he didn't do that immediately? Because when I think of President Trump's brand, people know him as being the guy that out of the gate, he calls things for what it is. A lot of people criticize him for coming out too early, for calling radical Islam, you know, when there's a terrorist attack. People love that about him. People hate that about him. But it seems like that is usually his style. He didn't do that this time.
Yeah, I don't know what the thinking was in the close circles surrounding the president, but I think yesterday was, you know, it was a good reset. And I think he needed to say what he said yesterday. And I think the conversation now should really be focused on how we're going to treat history in the United States. When you see bands of criminals, which is what they were yesterday, ripping down public property and being celebrated in the American media for doing so, we have a real problem on our hands. This is not about racial healing or racial unity when you see property being destroyed. That's not what it's about. It's about the eradication of history and an acknowledgement that we had really difficult, horrible moments in our country's history that we were able to overcome. And at the same time, we do give respect to the dead. I mean, all of our war dead. We respect them. Not respect everything they stood for, but respect the fact that when the time came, they stood up and fought for their views in this country. And I think when you see people who have no idea, it seems, about the history of this country, just roundly denouncing anyone who had any connection to the South, we're in very precarious times. I mean, how long before we see the Workers' Party, as you saw them yesterday, the Communist Party of the United States was represented there in Durham. They had the big banners. They were marching down the streets. How long before they show up at Monticello, where I spent 3 years in law school at Charlottesville in Virginia? How long before they show up at Mount Vernon? What else will be subjected to their eradication and denunciation? This is not about racial healing. This is about the control of the narrative and a destruction of historical recognition. That is terrifying. And what about books? Are they going to start burning books, too? I mean, why not?
So your argument, Laura, it's a very sound one. Where does it end? How far does it go at the end of this logic? What does that mean for now, then? What should the stance be for political leaders who are hearing from one side of the spectrum, this offends me, it's got to come down, yet someone else is saying when you erase your history, you don't understand it and you forget it? What is the proper stance to be taken
here?
Well,
I think more voices are always better than fewer voices. And so if you have a statue that people suddenly, a lot of them are suddenly offended by it, then put up a monument to peace and understanding or reflection or prayer or nearby. They actually did that in New Orleans, and that wasn't good enough. So we have different ways to recognize history. It's not like you don't have the head of the KKK build a monument to him. I mean, of course, they were Democrats, but you don't see that. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people like Robert E. Lee, who, when FDR acknowledged him, I think that was in the early 1930s, said he was one of the finest soldiers America had ever seen. That was FDR who said that about Robert E. Lee.
Sure.
And now they're going after Woodrow Wilson, who's one of the heroes of the internationalists. This is madness. This is not about what they claim it is. This is not about any type of unity or getting past the racial divide. This is about controlling a historical narrative, which we see happening all over the world. We see it with the Taliban pulling down Christian, historical sites. We've seen this in the old Soviet Union. We see this with the Stalinists. But in America, we have a way of discussing issues and bringing out more viewpoints that I think really does lead to greater understanding and recognition. But you didn't see that in Durham last night. You saw criminality.
Sure. Well, the Confederate-era statues being either vandalized or removed in North Carolina, Kentucky, Gainesville, Atlanta, Baltimore as well. Laura, who should be the decider of whether or not something in your town square is appropriate or should go?
Well, I guess, this is why we have local politics. If local politicians want to, get their list of the offending statues on a particular day, month, week, or year, I guess they can just do this on a regular basis and start erasing moments in their town or localities or city's history. I guess that's what we're just going to keep doing until we remove, every recognition of any point in time in our history where we had difficult challenges and difficult struggles. In my view, it's actually good to teach the young about what our country endured and how, even in very difficult times, individuals are complex figures. Lincoln was complex. P.T. Beauregard in New Orleans actually devoted his post-war life to building schools for all children. Robert E. Lee was a fascinating a soldier. His wife's family was actually the slave owners in that family. And I mean, if that is what we're going to be as a country, we have a lot of statues to tear down. We have a lot of monuments to raise. And I guess the Communist Party of the United States will be really happy that.
Including to our founders.
I love when you bring up this next generation and how do we teach them? How do we have the right debate? It seems like whenever these incidents happen, we lose sight of the big picture. I mean, you look back at the past 3 days, we have spent more time focused on pointing fingers and blaming and really talking about President Trump than we have about the actual debate and what actually happened there. How do we fix that? Is that the media's fault?
Well, I think it's a national recognition that we ultimately have to come together to understand that all history is complicated. It's difficult at times, but it doesn't mean you eradicate it and make it better. You actually have to continue to improve as a society. And tearing things down, in my view, is not the way to build a new future. And not when it's someone like P.T. Beauregard, who was an amazing figure post-war, Robert E. Lee, who by all Democrat president standards, was one of the finest soldiers in American history. I mean, if you now become a pariah for saying and quoting FDR, then I don't know where we go as a country. That's not learning, and that's not education. And what happened last night in Durham, all these media figures writing, "Oh, this is a great moment in the movement." What movement exactly? When you have the Workers' Party, go to workers.org, you'll see what they represent, marching down the streets, and they're holding their banner, and they say, "We won." Okay, what exactly are we winning here?
Yeah, exactly.
Great question.
Well, no, you said Judge Napolitano was on the couch earlier, said the answer to hate speech is more speech as opposed to banning it. You're saying the answer to tearing this down is more monuments, more conversation, more discussion to a complex history.
Look, towns and localities, they can do what they want. I mean, I believe in federalism and local rule, but I think we do have to have the conversation. Once you tear it all down, now what are you going to do for those inner city kids who can't get a decent education? What about the fact that we have rampant crime in places like New Orleans? Is that P.T. Beauregard statue thrown in a heap somewhere going to help that situation?
Does that answer all the questions?
The answer is it doesn't, and they know it doesn't. It's a game they're playing, and it's a cynical, sick, and twisted game. And I don't know where it stops, and it doesn't stop anywhere good. I don't think that.
Speaking of where it stops, Laura, the criticism of it, even the president's triple down. He's condemned it, and then condemned it again. Does the critique from the so-called mainstream media ever stop on this?
They want Donald Trump to bow down to their view of the way the world should be. And he represents everything that most of these people despise. He will never get it right in their eyes.
Did he bow down yesterday, Laura?
I think he did it. I think he did a good job yesterday. And again, they were complaining that he read from a teleprompter. On Saturday, they were complaining that he freelanced. So I don't know what will satisfy them. But I think President Trump has to keep his eye focused on the prize, renewing this country, going out to all communities, black, white, Latino, and poor, and spreading the message of economic renewal. That will help more than tearing down statues.
Laura Ingraham joining us from our nation's capital. Laura's going to go do her radio show now and edit Life's Ed. She's got a busy day. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Laura.
You're back.
All right, up next, President Trump waking up in New York City for the first time since taking office. And he's still, shockingly or non-shockingly, getting work done, even if he's not in the White House. We're live from Trump Tower with his big reveal coming today.
Plus, he hasn't even officially announced he's running for the Senate, but it turns out that Kid Rock might not even be able to after all. Really?
Are you kidding me?
That's a twist.
Hours, President Trump is expected to sign a new executive order on American infrastructure.
But while he's hard at work inside Trump Tower, protesters could be spewing even more hate right outside today.
That's right. David Lee Miller is live in New York City, just up the block there outside Trump Tower with the latest. Good morning, David.
Good morning to you from 5th Avenue and 56th Street. You know, this is President Trump's second visit to New York City, but it is the first time that he has actually overnighted here. He is waking up, as you just pointed out a little earlier, for the first time since president in Trump Tower. And security, as you would expect, is very intense. Take a look at the scene here on 5th Avenue. Even though 5th Avenue is now open to traffic, there are barricades lining 5th Avenue, as well as some of the nearby streets. And outside the very lavish Trump Tower, sort of incongruously, you can see there are at least half a dozen sanitation trucks here that are filled with sand, acting as a protective barrier. As you mentioned last night, The president was greeted by thousands of protesters as he arrived at Trump Tower. Many of them carried signs. Some of them read things like "New York hates you," "No Trump," "No KKK." There were also a smaller number of pro-Trump supporters who were also on hand. The two sides exchanged verbal barbs, but there was no physical confrontation. It was, for the most part, very peaceful, although 3 people were arrested for charges like disorderly conduct. And as you mentioned, on the agenda today, the nation's infrastructure. Trump campaigned about spending $1 trillion to improve bridges, tunnels, and roads, but so far there has been no specific plan that has materialized. Later today, the president, in an effort to try and change that, is going to issue an executive order that will try and streamline that process. And lastly, he has tweeted out, I should point this out very quickly, that it feels good to be home after 7 months, but the White House, he says, is very special. There is no place like it. And the U.S., he says, is really my home. He spends one more night at Trump Tower before returning to his country club in New Jersey. Back to you.
All right, David Lee Miller outside Trump Tower, just up the block and over 1. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Infrastructure is the one item that Republicans are hopeful that they will be able to get some bipartisan support.
I was going to say that Democrats might be able to help them out on.
Oh, because Democrats,
nice to
they'll
see.
always spend your money. They're happy to.
Jobs, Pete. Jobs.
No, money. Here you go. Money.
All right. And meanwhile, speaking of government and money, can the government charge you a fee to farm your own land? It's already happening. We've got details straight ahead.
And Elizabeth Warren rallying her far-left liberal friends, telling them they need to move even further to the left. That's how we defeat President Trump, she says. 2 Democrats with 2 very different views on that. Next.
This could hurt his chances if voters don't recognize Kid Rock and Bobby Ritchie are the same guy. And VA doctors in New Hampshire can now treat patients outside the VA facilities. Governor Chris Sununu, a Republican, signing an executive order to make it easier for our American heroes to get medical help, comes after a pipe burst at a state VA hospital which made it impossible to provide some necessary care. All right, Abby, over to you.
Thank you, Steve. All right, well, far-left Senator Elizabeth Warren seizing control of the Democratic Party during a grassroots speech over the weekend, telling moderate Democrats, you are the new minority. Take a listen to this.
We are not the gate crashers of today's Democratic Party. We are the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. If we're going to be the people who lead the Democratic Party back from the wilderness, then we can't waste energy arguing about whose issue matters more and who in our alliance should be voted off the island.
So is this the right message heading into the midterm elections? Here for a fair and balanced debate, 2 Democrats, Chuck Rocha, Democratic strategist and former Bernie Sanders surrogate, and Caprica Faro, executive in residence at American University School of Public Affairs and former Ohio Senate Democrat minority leader. Good morning to both of you. I'm really looking forward to this debate.
Good morning, Abby.
All right, so you listen to those words there. It seems definitely like a hit on the Clintons, but also, Chuck, saying, moderates, we don't need you. The progressive movement is the new movement, the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. You say she's exactly right.
I do, and it's funny, I was standing right behind her when she was doing that. I was the next speaker up. You know what really stinks is when you're the speaker right after Elizabeth Warren. Anyway, if you run a Democrat who acts like a Republican against a Republican, the Republican is going to win every single time. The first time I got on an airplane from East Texas was to fly to Washington, D.C., was to fight NAFTA, fight Bill Clinton and the Republicans to try to keep my factory job in East Texas. I think if Democrats talked more about keeping jobs in America, a la Donald Trump, we'd win a lot more elections.
Capri, is that the way forward, focusing on the more extreme wing of the party?
I certainly don't think so. I think that we do need to be a big tent party. I do agree with Chuck that we need to focus on the economic message. I think that's critically important. And the people that I represented for a decade, that's what they were looking for. Donald Trump did take that economic message away from us. But I really believe this, that we can be progressive, when it comes to issues. I'll just use myself as an example. I'm pro-choice. I'm pro-same-sex marriage. I'm pro-social safety net, but guess what? I believe in regulatory reform. I believe in lower taxes. I believe in making sure that we have smart reform when it comes to investing in our social safety net. And so I think if we marginalize, what I believe is the majority rank-and-file Democrat in the Midwest, what's going to happen is we are never going to win a national election again, because the people in the middle of the country see the Democratic Party as a coastal party that is focused on on, issues that are not necessarily directly impacting them. So we need to focus on those kitchen table issues, and that doesn't mean that we are Republican light. It doesn't mean that we are abandoning core principles. It means that we are listening to the American people and not trying to get the perfect in the way of the good.
But Chuck, we've heard that now from Howard Dean, from Joe Biden, and a number of people within the Democratic Party saying we need to get back to the core of this country, figuring out what our message is. Isn't it a problem when you're talking about alienating centrist moderates?
The problem with centrist moderates, the problem with regular Republicans, the problem with all of that is money. Every time you involve money in politics, whoever gives that money, they expect something in return. So you got to give them whatever policy they want to be a part of. If you want to know the smartest thing the Tea Party did is they make Republicans worry about a primary opposition every time that they run. If Labor, the environmentalists, and the left of our party got together and every time a Democrat was going to do something, if they were to be primaried from the other side, they would be a lot better Democrats.
Guess what, Chuck? The reason why we have those primaries, coming from the right is because of gerrymandering for decades being controlled by the Republicans who show up in midterm elections and who control and run the entire table when it comes to drawing congressional and legislative lines. So they are skewed very heavily towards either super Republicans or super Democrats, which means you got to look at the primary challenge, and that's why Republicans are so concerned about that kind of thing.
Guys, we could debate this all day long, but ultimately the American people are going to speak. We'll see what happens here.
We work for that.
Capri, good to see you both this morning.
Thanks.
All right, coming up, a shocking new report on Russian meddling in the election, but this time it's not about President Trump. It's actually about President Obama. Stay tuned for that. And voters heading to the polls in Alabama to fill the empty seat that was left by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And our own Todd Pyro is talking to some of them right now in Alabama. Todd, good morning. Back after this. He's got a great voice.
I mean, no, I love it. That's a great song.
All right, it is 28 minutes before the top of the hour on a very busy news morning, and Jillian's got some more headlines.
Hey, Jillian. That's right. I don't want to stop you from singing, though.
Please do.
I'm not sure which one's more important. No, but we do want to get you caught up on what you need to know before you leave the house. The government wants this farmer to shell out more than $2 million just for plowing his own field. John Duarte spoke about his 4-year-long legal battle earlier this summer on Fox Business Network.
What they're contending at this point is that my 4 to 7 inch plowing, the same type of plowing that wheat growers use all over America every day, either required a permit that has never been issued for a wheat grower before, or that I should have conducted practices such as farming around the vernal pools.
A judge will decide how much Duarte will pay during today's hearing. A biker loses control of his motorcycle and flies into oncoming traffic.
Australia's leading manufacturer. Sunbaker anti coil.
The biker tumbling over the hood of a car and landing on the ground. This happened in Australia. He is going to be okay, thankfully. Tim Tebow hitting a home run before he even stepped up to the plate. He joined a fan with cerebral palsy as she sang "God Bless America." Heartwarming moment happening during a game, 7th inning stretch of the game. The Tampa Bay Yankees and Port St. Lucie Mets. The fan is part of a group of special needs adults that performs in the area. Her mother says Tebow was, quote, just wonderful. So look at your headlines on this Tuesday. Send it back to you guys.
Folks love it.
Such a sweet story. Hey, he should compete with you for a voice.
He does everything well, so I'm sure he's got a great voice.
I wouldn't go up against Tim Tebow.
No way.
Well, she's not singing in the rain because it's not currently raining, but it could be any time now, Janice Dean.
No, it will not rain on our parade. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Where are you from?
DC.
And what are you doing here?
We're working.
You're working. Well, thanks for coming to Fox and Friends. Where are you from?
Lakeland, Florida.
Want to say hi to anybody at home?
Hey, home.
Okay, good. And what about you?
Sarasota, Florida.
And happy birthday to your honey. Who's your honey?
Mike. Happy birthday, Mike.
Mike, why isn't Mike here?
We're on a girls' road trip.
Girls' road trip! Can I join?
Yes!
Excellent. All right, I'll be joining after this weather hit. Let's take a look at the maps real quick, and I'll show you what's going on across the country. A little cooler than average across the Northeast, but it's not raining right now. We like that. Across the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes, we have a system that's going to move in from the plains, and that's going to give us the potential, unfortunately, for some hail, maybe some damaging winds. Oh, and there goes my earring. But these things happen when we're live on television, right? And also, we are watching Hurricane Gert out in the Atlantic, but Gert is going to remain offshore and not affect us, maybe give us some surfing. And what about you, sir? What's this? What do we got here?
So what I have is a book. It's called Beware the Predator. It's available on Amazon, International Spy Museum, NRA,
okay,
and the CIA book.
Fantastic. And what about you? Do you have a book to sell?
No. I'm just so glad to be here. We're from Newark, Ohio.
Yay.
Hi, family.
Hi, family in Ohio. You want to say hi to Abby and Steve and Pete? Abby, Steve, and Pete. We love you.
Thank you, Janice. Now go find your earring.
We
And
love
she's going
everyone
on a
out in the
road trip,
plaza.
she just said. So
that's what I hear.
You may not see her for the rest of the week.
All right. Well, all eyes are on Alabama, where the polls are open for today's big special election.
So what are voters there saying this morning? Let's check back in with Todd Pyro. He's been talking to them live at Jim's Restaurant in Prattville, Alabama. Good morning.
Good morning, guys. Of course, we've been eating grits, but we also have been talking politics. This race is really interesting. Heavy Republican area here, 75% for President Trump in the 2016 election. But there's really, according to the experts, a three-way race between Mo Brooks, Luther Strange, and Roy Moore. The top two will go to a runoff unless there's a 50% winner, but it doesn't look like there's going to be a 50% winner. And when you talk to the individuals in this Jim's Restaurant, it really does seem like it's a race between Luther Strange and Roy Moore. We're going to talk to these fine folks who are Roy Moore supporters. First, Sarah. Sarah is retired, but you also play piano at a church, keyboard at a church. You're voting for Roy Moore because you like the way he doesn't back down.
Right.
Talk to me about that.
He's very conservative, and he stands firm. He doesn't back down. So I really do appreciate that in a person, especially these days.
Now, you told me you are a Trump supporter. How does being a Trump supporter work with voting for Roy Moore? Because, as you know, President Trump supported Luther Strange.
Yes, I know he did support Luther Strange. Can't explain that, but I know that he is conservative, and I think he has the best interests of us and our country, and I think Roy Moore will support that. Understood. He will be there with him.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Now we're going to go to your daughter, Beth. And Beth, also in the same boat, Trump supporter, also voting for Roy Moore. But before we get to that, I want to talk about Obamacare, because you work in healthcare. You moved up here for a job in healthcare, and you said that company, healthcare company, had been there for 30 years and then went belly up because of Obamacare. Explain.
Just the changes that were made, they weren't able to keep up. They went under, and it took a while to find a job at the hospital. And being at the hospital, I see a lot of what goes on with the insurance companies. You may have insurance. That doesn't mean it's going to pay for things. That falls back on the patient. So it's a big burden. Obamacare's got to be fixed.
Getting back to this election, why do you support Roy Moore?
Roy Moore stands on his convictions, like she said. He has proven that. And I know he will stand and back Trump because they have the same values.
You mentioned to me, you say they're both constitutionalists.
They are.
Okay.
And they want to back the Constitution and need to get the power back to the people.
So we do see that Roy Moore has, according to a lot of experts, a lead in this race, but Luther Strange is coming in second in a lot of the polls, and we're going to go back to my buddy Walt. Talked to you earlier. Walt, briefly explain why you are voting for Luther Strange.
Well, Luther has publicly said that he would back Trump's agenda, and of course President Trump has officially endorsed him, so it just tells me I need to vote for Luther Strange, even though I'm not a fan of any of these candidates, but that's who I'm voting for.
Understood. I want to thank you for your service to our country. Retired Air Force. And I'm going to bring in Phyllis here. We're all a fan of Phyllis. Let's give Phyllis a round of applause. Phyllis is the current owner of Jim's Restaurant. First, tell us who Jim was. Jim was your dad. Describe his service in World War II.
My dad was in World War II, in the Korean War. He was over in Germany.
And when he finished his time serving our great nation, he decided to start a restaurant. And now this is, correct me if I'm wrong, the oldest family-owned restaurant or business here in Prattville, correct?
You're correct. That's right.
We want to thank you for your hospitality with us today.
Appreciate you coming.
You know, it's a big election day here in Alabama. Phyllis has been great. The entire crew here at Jim's Restaurant's been great. And these fans have also been great. One final time, you know where I'm going with this. We've sort of gone over the politics. War Eagle or Roll Tide? I'm a sucker for cheering. We are not finishing this debate today, friends.
It's a tie. All right.
Pretty mixed. Thank you, Todd. And thank you, Phyllis, for letting us come into that diner.
Thank you, Jim, for serving.
Indeed. Of course, he's down in Alabama for today's special election to fill Jeff Sessions' Senate seat. We've got some video just into the Fox News channel. That is a little while ago. Luther Strange himself just voted. You've got to figure he voted for himself. There are about 10 Republicans who are running, and the way it works down in Alabama, as is the case in many states, unless somebody can get above 50%, and with 10 people running, it's going to be tough. There's going to be a runoff with the top two, and right now, according to Real Clear Politics, it's between Judge Roy Moore and Luther Strange.
And the president certainly doubling down in his support of Luther Strange, tweeting this morning his support yet again. So
we'll see how much influence that will have.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
You got
Indeed.
it. Well, the left-wing groups at the Virginia protests, not called protesters, the media called them anti-racist counter-protesters. Okay. Well, our next guest says they're just as deplorable as the other side, and he'll explain why next.
And medical marijuana supporters claim they needed to treat chronic pain. Bad news, folks. That theory just went up in smoke.
Well played, Steve.
Not a doctor, but I play one on TV. Right now, we've got some health headlines for you. First up, let's talk about smoking, medical marijuana. Apparently, if you do that for chronic pain and PTSD, it might not do anything. VA researchers say there is not enough evidence to prove pot can actually relieve symptoms. They also found marijuana could increase a user's risk of car accidents and short-term cognitive impairment. Medical marijuana is currently legal in 28 states and the District of Columbia. And a warning over a common chemical often found in hand sanitizers and other hygiene products. Researchers say exposure to the antibacterial agent trichlorobin caused birth defects in tests on mice. The findings could have implications for people. We'll keep you posted. All right, Pete, over to you.
Dr. Ducey, thank you very much.
You bet.
All right, critics slam President Trump for condemning hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. But did he have a point? In a new op-ed, author Matt Walsh says alt-right white supremacists and leftist Antifa thugs deserve each other. He writes this. He said, these degenerates mirror each other in just about every way. They are each other. They are twins separated by circumstance and reunited in the streets where they throw rocks and fists at their own reflections. Matt Walsh joins us now. Matt, I read your op-ed. It's a fascinating piece. And your thesis is effectively that you can point your fingers all you want at Nazi white supremacists, but you better point fingers over at the Antifa folks as well. There's problems on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not... Listen, I think it's really important that this is not a game of what about, where we're not allowed to criticize one side without someone trying to change the subject and say, well, what about the other side? So this is not what it's about. It's about getting a clear picture of the entire scene. And when we do that, we see, because I think, things are only going to get worse, especially if we don't understand what's going on. And what you have, whether it's with the white supremacists or Antifa, you have two quote-unquote sides that are really two strains of the same disease. They're very, very similar. And the only thing that separates them, as far as I can tell, is who they hate. They hate different groups, but neither one cares about liberty. Neither cares about the Constitution. They're both fascist. They're authoritarian. They just want to control. They're both violent. They're nihilist. So they have almost everything in common except for who they happen to have chosen as their group to hate.
Matt, you write, back and forth we go as our culture circles the drain. You also make the point that on both sides, but speaking to what happened on Saturday, they also undo any legitimate claims that they have. You write, in the same way, these people ought to be able to protect racial double standards, or protest racial double standards or Confederate statue removals without becoming actual Nazis. Why do you have to be a Nazi to take issue with some things that people might not like changing?
Yeah, I don't like the excuse making that goes on. And I hear this a little bit from some people on the right, where they say, "Well, listen, there's hypocrisy. The media, they're attacking the way that they treat BLM, and the violence has gone on with BLM. There's this double standard." Yeah, I understand all that. That's absolutely true. But you should be able to oppose that without actually becoming a Nazi. Just like on the other side, listen, if you think there are problems with some of the police shootings that have gone on, and I think most of that is overblown, but if you have problems with that, you should be able to speak out against it without burning down a CVS. I don't think that's too much to ask. This is not a high bar that we're setting for people, and so this goes for either side. There's no excuse at all, and I think that on both sides, what you have are people who are really just looking for a reason to lash out and be violent. And we can't forget, even though this is the most recent thing, we can't forget that it was only last year where several Dallas police officers were executed in the street in the middle of a Black Lives Matter protest. We can't forget about that.
Absolutely.
We can't just put that to the side.
It can lash back in any direction. We have to leave it right there, Matt, but I have to end by reading another line that I thought was just great from your op-ed. It said, "You said, I don't condone violence unless it's a World War II vet delivering a grandfatherly whooping to his vile, ungrateful Nazi grandson." Great visual there. Matt Walsh, thanks for the piece and for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Keeping your home cool costs a ton of money in the summer. Up next, the secret to make your AC 40% more efficient, and you can do it yourself. But first, let's check in with Bill Hemmer for what's coming up at the top of the hour. Good morning, Bill.
Hey, Pete, good morning from Washington, D.C. There's more fallout from the violence in Virginia, but the list of cities about to remove statues is only growing. So where is this national debate headed now? Big Republican race in Alabama. How will the Trump factor play in this vote? We'll have a closer look at that. Has North Korea had a change of heart? John Bolton will analyze. And did Google screw up? That fired engineer is now talking. And Shannon and I will see you with all that. 10 minutes away, top of the hour. We'll see you then.